This is how Hamas members are surrendering to Israel.
اتخذنا قرار إنه بدناش نقاتل أول ما يجي الجيش بدنا نسلم حالنا.
We are now in month 4 of the war between Hamas and Israel. And very recently, we have begun to see the unthinkable from Hamas members deep inside of Kahn Yunis. For those that do not remember, Kahn Yunis is Hamas's stronghold HQ, where their best fighters sit and most of their top compounds and infrastructures are all located. The fighters that are situated here are their top guns, their most equipped and experienced fighters who have never given Hamas leadership any reason to place them elsewhere when it comes to war. In fact, 4 months ago and many times since, I've countlessly analyzed the differences between good and bad, deciphering right from wrong, and how no matter what your political upbringing is or your prejudices pertaining to the Middle Eastern conflict, there is a right and there is a wrong in this war. The October 7th attacks on Israel was blatantly wrong, and there is zero justification for not condemning all of those atrocities. And those who took part in those attacks claim to be freedom fighters, a resistance group trying to fight for freedom. And part of their resistance is to be true martyrs, to die as a shaheed. So I want to pose this question. What freedom fighter who is allegedly fighting all the way until the end, by any means necessary for the goodness of their nation, what freedom fighter chooses to just back down, fold their deck, and completely surrender?
هل ضحيتوا على الجنود اللي فاتوا على نفق؟
لا.
يعني ايه صار؟
اتخذنا قرار إنه بدناش نقاتل أول ما يجي الجيش بدنا نسلم حالنا.
The truth is, he and his fellow fighters, deep inside of these tunnels inside of Kahn Yunis, knew that from the beginning, there is absolutely no clear path to victory and to civilian suffering. All they were doing up until this point were following orders from their coward leaders. And all of these leaders have them down deep underground, 400 or 500 meters below ground level, trying to fight off the Israeli army who are there to defend themselves and simply rescue all of the hostages. And by this point, you and I both know, let's be honest, that Sinwar and even his political bureau colleagues that are somewhere in Qatar sitting high in a hotel, they knew that the far majority of their fighters would be killed. First, not only just by a justifiable response to the October 7th attacks in Israel, let's not forget for a second the on-ground barbaric slaughter that they pulled off in Israel, and also all of the rockets that were firing overhead through barrages at the same exact time. And these leaders of Hamas, of course, knew that after this would all be followed by an on-ground invasion into the Gaza Strip. It's essentially just a city trying to fight an entire country. Hamas stands no chance against Israel, and they knew that from the beginning. And as terribly smart as the leaders of Hamas are to be able to pull off the greatest massacre of civilians in a single day humanity has ever seen, they are also smart enough and wise enough to understand that what is currently happening to their entire terror organization and on-ground fighters was inevitable without question.
شو سويتوا؟
قعدنا في الغرفة حطينا السلاح كليته برا برا الغرفة واجا الجيش أخذ السلاح كليته يعني برا الغرفة وقعدنا نستنى لما جا الجيش رفعنا ايدينا واستسلمنا.
So what happens when one chooses to surrender? Especially during war. You are showing to your enemy that you have completely folded, you've given up, and you will not resist anymore. I thought this was a resistance movement, a movement of freedom fighters whose charter fully states the destruction of all Jews in the world and the entire state of Israel. I thought this movement, I thought this charter, I thought this fight for freedom was also all about dying as a martyr. Martyrs do not give up and surrender. They die proudly if and when it ever happens to them. What we are beginning to see unfold is a phenomenon that not many people were expecting to happen. But when you fully understand the entire landscape of this situation, when you understand right from wrong, you realize that when one surrenders, they have given up completely and submit to their so-called enemy. They know that they cannot defend themselves, but they also don't want to die trying to. Look, if dying was not an issue to him and the masses of Hamas terrorists that have begun to just fold, they would have no reason to surrender a soul. They would continue until the end.
امتى انتميت للجناح العسكري تبع حماس؟
2009
وين أقيلت؟
في نفق في خان يونس.
What do you think his commanders and leaders told him back in 2009 when he decided to join Hamas? There is no surrendering. There is no giving in to the IDF and the state of Israel. There is no such thing as defeat. There is never a time and will never be a time giving into the hands of the evil Zionists. That is their code of conduct. And you do not spend 15 years inside of a terrorist organization if you choose not to abide by that code. And now that code is being broken. Last week, we saw Gazans en route to the south evacuating their homes because they had no choice but to leave, and they began to approach IDF soldiers to protest against Hamas. This is a version of Hamas fighters protesting against Hamas. They are not allowed to do this. Ask yourself what would happen if these fighters who got captured by the IDF got taken back into Israel, questioned, and then released back into the Gaza Strip. What do you think would happen to them? What, you think that their Hamas colleagues would be waiting with tea and cookies and a big warm hug?
أنو سلاح كان معكم في نفق؟
كلاشينات، قذائف رباجية، أبوات ناسفة، قوارب متفجرة.
The fighters inside of the Hamas tunnels are equipped with everything he just told you. Hear me out for a second. Gaza borders two different countries, Egypt and Israel. Egypt has an entry point through the Rafah crossing on the southern tip of the Gaza Strip, and on the eastern and northern borders of Gaza, there are two different entry points into Israel. That leaves the western border of Gaza, which is the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea. The ocean. Weapons and equipment are not being distributed through the Rafah crossing from Egypt into Gaza, and they most certainly are not being delivered through the two entry points from Israel into the Gaza Strip, both at the Erez crossing and Keren Shalom borders. So that leaves one option, well, two if you put your thinking cap on just for 1 second. One, the sea. Yes, this means that supplies and weapons are being snuck into the Gaza Strip through the sea. That makes sense. Where are they coming from? Iran. Iran is manufacturing, supplying, and delivering these supplies that are being shipped from them through all of their different proxies, making their way to the Mediterranean coastline right on the Gaza Strip. And the second is not by sea, and no, it's not by air. Underground. Look, at this point, 4 months into the war, it is impossible to deny the distribution process of goods and supplies from Iran to the Gaza Strip. Kalashnikovs, RPGs, and explosives, these are not devices that you can just go buy at a store in Gaza. Throughout the years, they have been given funding and supplies to be able to pull off events like October 7th, or regularly scheduled rocket barrages, or armed fighters on paragliders, or any of the equipment, compounds, and machinery all required to build an entire underground city network of tunnels, which go beyond our mind's capability of comprehension. They smuggle, they build, and they execute.
شو بتنصح لناشدين القارئين الموجودين بالانفاق؟
أنا بنصح الكل إنه يستسلم، إنه مصيرك إما هتموت.
When you're finally able to read between the lines and understand the truth, especially in this situation, good and bad, deciphering right from wrong, these terrorists, these Hamas fighters beginning to surrender, is a statement. Number one, it shows you who is and who is not currently being defeated in this war.
Been significantly surprised at the progress of the idea. No military that I've ever studied have faced since World War II, if not ever, with the Hamas trying to get as many civilians killed as possible. If you would have asked me before the war, I would have thought the IDF would have taken way more casualties, would not have cleared as much terrain. What the Israel Defense Forces have learned in their operations in Gaza is worth more than any type of technology. The ability for the troops to close with an enemy and destroy an enemy in the hardest environment should send fears to Hezbollah. If there was ever a time not to mess with the IDF, it would be right now. Their ability to integrate the ground forces with the air forces, and Israel is unique on their capability to do that all the way down to the base commander level. Even the practice of allowing all the civilians to leave an urban area is a standard best practice, and Israel did that, but not all militaries, including the United States, have done that. If you list all the things the IDF have done to prevent civilian casualties, it outweighs any military in the history of war. People who say you can't destroy Hamas, again, aren't educated on the history of war. Yes, if you want to destroy an ideal, that takes a lot of work. But to destroy Hamas's military capability from ever harming Israel again is a very clear and achievable objective, and the IDF are doing it in Gaza.
If you are not facing any defeat in war, you don't have a reason to surrender. The IDF is uncovering and exposing more and more intelligence and understanding of these tunnel networks and how Hamas operates, their barbaric, inhumane warfare tactics. And these Hamas fighters have to give up. They have no other choice. Their other choice is to die, is to be a shaheed. So you have to ask yourself for a second, this phenomenon that we're starting to see unfold. For example, Muhammad here, who joined Hamas over 15 years ago. He essentially has spent 15 years of his life abiding by the written and scripted charter of the destruction of the state of Israel and all Jews across the world. But now it's time to surrender. There is no surrendering in the Hamas charter. There is no end to this fight for freedom, according to the freedom that Hamas is allegedly fighting for. But this fight for freedom, which consists of using civilians as human shields, and as a result of that fight, an increased continuous count of their own civilian casualties, has never, is not, and will never work. Innocent Palestinians have begun to protest Hamas approaching IDF soldiers. And now you have Hamas fighters doing the same thing with a different strategy against their very own leadership. The IDF and all of the soldiers in the Israeli army will never raise their flag and surrender to Hamas terrorists. It will never happen. The IDF is fighting for its security, its safety, the return of the hostages, and to remove the exact thing that is causing all of the damage we are seeing. And we are now 4 months in, and you have no choice at this point to be able to put your prejudices to the side, your biases to the side, to differentiate good and bad and decipher right from wrong, because this phenomenon is only going to continue.